Single mom got fired for being late after helping an injured Hell's Angel. What he did changed her life. Julia hurried down Monroe Street, her worn sneakers slapping against the concrete. The morning sun was already too bright, promising another scorching summer day. Her arms ached from carrying Ethan's Marvel superhero lunchbox in one hand and her oversized purse in the other. She'd forgotten to pack his lunch the night before, another item on her endless to-do list that had slipped through the cracks. "Mom, you're going to be late again," Ethan had said earlier, his big brown eyes full of worry as she dropped him off at summer camp. Even at 8, he noticed everything. The growing pile of bills on the kitchen counter, the way she counted change at the grocery store, the dark circles under her eyes that no amount of drugstore concealer could hide. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. "I'll be fine, sweetie," she had assured him, forcing a smile. But now, power walking past the row of small businesses that lined the street, Julia knew she was cutting it close. Her boss at the diner had already warned her twice about tardiness. One more strike, and she'd be out. Her chest tightened at the thought. She couldn't lose this job, not with rent due next week and Ethan's new school shoes to think about. The diner wasn't much, long hours on her feet, demanding customers, and tips that barely covered groceries, but it was steady work. And steady was what they needed right now. A car horn blared nearby, making her jump. Julia clutched her purse closer, feeling the weight of her life pressing down on her shoulders. Sometimes it felt like she was always running to work, running to pick up Ethan, running to keep their small world from falling apart. The familiar scent of fresh bread wafted from Miller's bakery as she passed, reminding her that she hadn't eaten breakfast. Her stomach growled, but she pushed the hunger aside. There wasn't time. There was never enough time. She checked her watch again, 7:52. 8 minutes to make it 6 more blocks. Maybe if she cut through the alley behind the hardware store. The sound of screeching tires and metal grinding against pavement cut through her thoughts. Julia's head snapped up just in time to see a motorcycle swerve violently to avoid a delivery truck. The bike skidded sideways, throwing its rider onto the sidewalk with a sickening thud before crashing into a lamppost. Julia froze. 20 feet ahead of her lay a man in a leather vest, face down and motionless on the concrete. His motorcycle, a massive black Harley, was crumpled like a tin can against the pole, its wheel still spinning uselessly in the air. Tom seemed to slow down. Julia noticed the patches on his vest, Hell's Angels, the tattoos visible on his arms, the skull ring on his outstretched hand, everything she'd been taught to avoid. For a split second, her feet refused to move. She thought of Ethan, of her job, of all the reasons she should keep walking. But then she saw the growing pool of blood near the man's head, and something deeper than fear took over. Julia dropped Ethan's lunchbox and her purse. Her heart pounded as she ran toward the fallen biker, her motherly instincts overwhelming her initial hesitation. As she got closer, she could see he was a big man, at least 6 feet tall, with a thick beard and long hair. But right now, he wasn't a threatening figure from a notorious motorcycle gang. He was someone who needed help. She dropped to her knees beside him, hands shaking as she reached out to check if he was breathing. Julia's hands trembled as she knelt beside the fallen biker. The rough concrete bit into her knees through her waitress uniform, but she barely noticed. Up close, his massive frame made her feel tiny in comparison. Dark tattoos snaked up his arms, disappearing under his leather vest. "Sir, can you hear me?" Her voice shook slightly as she leaned closer. A low groan escaped his lips. His eyes fluttered open, deep brown and clouded with pain. Blood trickled from a nasty gash above his right eyebrow, and his leather vest was scuffed raw from sliding across the pavement. "Don't move," Julia said firmly, falling into the calm tone she used when Ethan was hurt. "You might have injured your neck or spine." The man tried to shift anyway, letting out a sharp hiss of pain. My leg," he managed through gritted teeth. Julia glanced down and saw his left leg bent at an awkward angle. Her stomach lurched, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm going to call an ambulance. Okay? Just stay still." With shaking fingers, She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed 911. A small crowd had started to gather, their murmurs creating a nervous backdrop to the emergency operator's calm voice. 911, what's your emergency? There's been a motorcycle accident on Monroe Street, in front of Miller's Bakery, Julia reported, forcing herself to sound clear and coherent. The rider is conscious but badly injured. He has a head wound and possibly a broken leg. An ambulance is being dispatched to your location, the operator assured her. Can you stay with him until they arrive? Julia's eyes darted to her watch, 7:57. Her shift started in 3 minutes. Yes, I'll stay with him. Following the operator's instructions, Julia kept talking to the injured man, trying to keep him alert and still. I'm Julia, she said softly. What's your name? Jack, he mumbled, his face pale beneath his beard. They call me Big Jack. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, mixing with the blood. Julia dug through her purse and found a clean napkin she'd grabbed from the diner yesterday. With gentle movements, she pressed it against the cut on his forehead. Jack's breathing was ragged but steady. Every few seconds, his massive hands would clench into fists, knuckles white with pain. The skull ring on his right hand caught the morning sunlight, sending tiny reflections dancing across the pavement. The ambulance is coming, Julia assured him, hearing distant sirens. Just hold on. She glanced at her watch again. 8:06. Her heart sank. She was officially late for work, and this time there would be consequences. But as she looked down at Jack's pale face and heard his labored breathing, she knew she couldn't leave him alone on the cold sidewalk. Getting dizzy, Jack muttered, squeezing his eyes shut against the pain. Stay with me, Jack, Julia said firmly, keeping pressure on his wound. Tell me about your bike. It's a Harley, right? He managed a weak nod, wincing at the movement. Custom, built it myself. The sirens grew louder, but the minutes crawled by like hours. Julia's uniform was stained with dirt and blood. Her knees ached from the concrete, and her mind kept flashing to her boss's angry face. But she stayed, talking softly to Jack, keeping him conscious, waiting for help to arrive. Julia hurried through the diner's back in trance, her uniform stained and disheveled. The familiar sounds of clinking plates and sizzling grills filled the air, but today they felt like accusations. Her watch showed 8:47, almost an hour late. Tom, her manager, stood by the time clock with his arms crossed. His thin lips were pressed into a hard line, making the wrinkles around his mouth deeper. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his weathered face. I'm so sorry, Julia started, her words tumbling out. There was an accident. A man was hurt, and I had to help. I called 911 and stayed until the ambulance came. I couldn't just leave him there. Tom's expression didn't change. This is the third time you've been late this month, Julia. I know, but this was different. It was an emergency. Someone could have died. Her hands twisted the hem of her apron. Please, I need this job. Ethan, I don't want to hear it. Tom's voice was flat, emotionless. You know our policy. 3 strikes, and you're out. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, filling the heavy silence. Around them, the diner continued its morning rush, coffee cups clinking, orders being called out, other waitresses hurrying past with loaded trays. The normalcy of it all made Julia's head spin. Tom, please. Her voice cracked. I've worked here for 2 years. I've covered extra shifts, stayed late, came in early when you needed me. I'm asking for one chance. Rules are rules. He turned away, pulling a stack of papers from his pocket. Here's your final check. Don't bother clocking in. Julia's fingers trembled as she took the envelope. The thin paper felt like lead in her hands. Her throat tightened, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of him. What about my tables? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. My regulars? Sarah will cover them. Tom walked away, already calling out instructions to another waitress. Julia stood frozen, the envelope clutched in her hands. Around her, life at the diner continued as if nothing had happened, as if her world hadn't just shattered. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes in the air, illuminating the familiar booths where she'd served countless meals shared countless smiles. She walked to the break room in a daze, gathered her few belongings from her locker, a spare hair tie, a small photo of Ethan, her emergency makeup kit. The items seemed strange in her hands, like artifact from another life. The parking lot was quiet when she stepped outside. Her car sat alone in the corner, covered in a thin layer of morning dew. Julia slid into the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine. Instead, she pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long moment before dialing the school's number. "Hello, this is Julia Matthews," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I need to leave a message for my son, Ethan. I won't be able to pick him up after school today. He'll need to take the bus home." The secretary's voice was kind, promising to pass along the message. Julia thanked her and ended the call, but her finger lingered over Ethan's smiling face on her phone's background. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over, running hot down her cheeks. Her shoulders shook as quiet sobs racked her body. In the distance, she could hear the diner's breakfast crowd through the open windows, the normal morning routine continuing without her. Julia sat motionless in her car, staring at the scratched dashboard where old coffee stains marked countless early morning rushes to work. The parking lot had emptied now, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the gentle hum of distant traffic. Her hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. The morning sun beat through the windshield, warming her face, but inside she felt cold. Empty. The envelope with her final paycheck lay on the passenger seat, mocking her with its finality. "What am I going to do?" she whispered to the empty car. Bills flashed through her mind like a cruel slideshow. Rent due in 2 weeks, Ethan's medication, groceries, utilities. Her savings would barely cover half of what they needed. The sound of plates clattering inside the diner made her flinch. Through the window, she could see Sarah, sweet, reliable Sarah, serving coffee to Mr. Henderson, one of Julia's regular customers. He always tipped well and asked about Ethan's baseball games. Now, someone else would hear his stories about his grandchildren. Julia's phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor. "Everything okay, dear? Saw you come home early." The simple message of concern made her throat tight again. Mrs. Rodriguez often watched Ethan after school when Julia worked late shifts. Another reminder of all the people who helped hold her fragile world together. She closed her eyes, letting her head rest against the seat. The memory of the injured biker flooded back, his pain-filled eyes, the way his hand had gripped hers while they waited for the ambulance. Would she make the same choice again, knowing it would cost her job? The answer came without hesitation. Yes. She couldn't have lived with herself if she'd walked away. A car horn honked in the distance, startling her from her thoughts. Julia glanced at the clock on her dashboard. 9:30 a.m. Normally, she'd be refilling coffee cups and memorizing breakfast orders. Instead, she was sitting in an empty parking lot, unemployed for the first time in years. The weight of single motherhood pressed down on her shoulders, heavier than ever. Ethan's face floated in her mind, his gap-toothed smile, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about science class, how he still hugged her tight every morning before school. He deserved so much more than this constant struggle. Julia reached for her purse, fingers brushing against the small notebook where she kept track of job applications. There were other diners in town, other restaurants that might need an experienced waitress. Maybe it was time to look beyond serving tables. She'd always dreamed of doing something more, but dreams had taken a back seat to survival. One step at a time, she whispered her mother's favorite saying. The words felt hollow now, but they were all she had. She turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered to life, a reminder that even her car was hanging on by a thread. Home wasn't far. Their small apartment, with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in Ethan's artwork. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. As she pulled out of the parking lot, Julia straightened her shoulders. They'd been through tough times before. When Ethan's father left, when they'd lost their house, when Ethan got sick last winter, somehow they'd always made it through. This would be no different. She merged into traffic, heading home. There would be time for tears later, but right now, she needed to think, to plan. Ethan needed her to be strong. And if there was one thing Julia Matthews knew how to do, it was fighting for her son. Julia stared at the newspaper's job listings spread across her kitchen table, red pen in hand. The morning light filtered through the worn curtains, casting shadows over the circled advertisements. Her coffee had gone cold, forgotten during an hour of searching through positions she wasn't quite qualified for. She rubbed her tired eyes. After dropping Ethan at school, she'd thrown herself into the job hunt, determined not to waste a single minute. The classified pages were dotted with her notes: experience needed, full-time only, nights and weekends. Each requirement felt like another door closing. The doorbell's sudden ring made her jump, sloshing coffee onto the newspaper. Who could be visiting at this hour? Mrs. Rodriguez usually came by in the afternoons, and she wasn't expecting any packages. Julia smoothed her wrinkled t-shirt and pushed her tangled hair behind her ears as she walked to the door. Through the peephole, she saw a large figure standing on her welcome mat. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the broad shoulders and thick beard. She hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. It was the biker from yesterday, Jack. He looked different standing upright, despite the bandages visible under his leather jacket. His presence filled the entire doorframe. Julia opened the door, trying to keep her voice steady. "How did you find my address?" Jack shifted his weight, wincing slightly. "The paramedics. They had your information from yesterday." His voice was deep but gentle, nothing like what she'd expected. "I hope you don't mind me showing up like this." "No, it's—" Julia trailed off, unsure how to finish that sentence. She noticed he was holding himself carefully, favoring his left side. "Are you okay? Should you be up and walking around?" "I've had worse," he said, then cleared his throat. "Listen, I heard about what happened at the diner. That you got fired because you stayed to help me." Julia's cheeks flushed. "How did you?" "Small town," Jack said. "Word gets around." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I wanted to make things right." "Make things right." Julia crossed her arms, suddenly defensive. "I don't need—" "Please," Jack interrupted, his voice soft but firm. "Let me finish. You didn't have to stop yesterday. Most people wouldn't have. But you did, and it cost you your job." He held out the envelope. "This is a loan, to help until you find something else." Julia stared at the envelope, her mind racing. Pride warred with practicality. She thought of Ethan, of the bills piling up, of the dwindling numbers in her bank account. "I can't accept that," she said, even as her stomach twisted. "You don't owe me anything. Anyone would have helped." Jack shook his head. "No, they wouldn't have. And yes, I do owe you." He gestured to his bandaged ribs. "Could have been a lot worse if you hadn't been there." Julia remained frozen in the doorway, her fingers gripping the door frame. The envelope seemed to hang in the air between them, a lifeline she wasn't sure she should grab. "I'm sorry," Jack said, his expression earnest. "I know this is disrupting your life even more. But please, let me help. It's just a loan. You can pay it back when you're back on your feet." Julia opened her mouth to refuse again, but no words came out. She stood there, caught between her desperate need and her fierce independence, unsure which way to turn. Julia's fingers traced the edge of the envelope, but she gently pushed it back toward Jack. "I appreciate the offer, I really do. But I can't take your money." Jack tucked the envelope back into his jacket, nodding as if he'd expected this response. His eyes, surprisingly kind beneath his furrowed brow, studied her face. "You're proud. I respect that." "It's not just pride," Julia said, crossing her arms. "I need to figure this out on my own, for my son's sake." A hint of a smile touched Jack's lips. "What if I told you there might be another way I could help?" Julia leaned against the doorframe, exhaustion seeping into her bones. "What do you mean?" "I'm involved with this charity event happening this weekend," Jack said, his voice taking on a different tone, less apologetic, more businesslike. "It's called Hearts for Hope. We raise money for underprivileged kids, help them get school supplies, that sort of thing." Julia shifted her weight, curiosity winning over her initial hesitation. "That sounds nice, but how does that help my situation?" "Well," Jack continued, "we're still short-staffed for the event. It's a 2-day thing, decent pay, and more importantly—" He paused, making sure he had her full attention. "It's a networking goldmine. Local business owners, community leaders, people who are always looking for reliable employees. Julia uncrossed her arms, her defenses lowering slightly. What kind of work would it be? Mostly coordinating volunteers, helping with registration, making sure everything runs smoothly. Jack gestured with his hands as he spoke. Nothing complicated, but it requires someone organized, someone good with people. He gave her a meaningful look. Someone like you. You don't even know me, Julia protested, but her voice had lost its edge. I know you stopped to help a stranger when you had every reason not to, Jack replied. That tells me plenty. Julia bit her lip considering. The practical part of her brain was already calculating. 2 days of work would help with immediate expenses, and the possibility of making connections couldn't be ignored. Still, something nagged at her. Why are you really doing this? She asked, meeting his gaze directly. Jack didn't flinch from her scrutiny. Because someone once gave me a chance when I needed it most. Sometimes that's all it takes, one opportunity, one door opening when all the others seem closed. The morning sun had crept higher, warming Julia's back through her thin t-shirt. In the distance, she could hear the familiar sounds of her neighborhood coming to life. Car doors slamming, dogs barking, the garbage truck making its rounds. Her world felt both very small and overwhelmingly large in that moment. When is it? She asked finally. This Saturday and Sunday, starting at 8. Jack pulled out a business card and handed it to her. The address is on there. Just ask for me when you arrive. Julia took the card, turning it over in her hands. The paper was thick, expensive feeling, with simple black text stating Hearts for Hope and an address. No name. She drew in a deep breath. Okay, she said, the word feeling heavy with possibility. I'll be there. Jack's face remained neutral, but his eyes brightened. Good, he said simply. He turned to leave, then paused. And Julia? Thank you for giving this a chance. Julia watched as he walked away, his large frame moving carefully down her cracked sidewalk. The business card felt warm in her palm, and despite her uncertainty, a small spark of hope flickered in her chest. She had no idea what to expect, but right now, any opportunity was better than none at all. Julia smoothed down her black dress, the nicest one she owned, as she stepped through the gleaming glass doors of the Grand Plaza Hotel. The lobby sparkled with crystal chandeliers, and well-dressed people milled about, their laughter echoing off marble floors. Her sensible flats clicked softly as she made her way toward the ballroom, following the elegant signs for Hearts for Hope. She clutched her small purse tighter, feeling like an imposter among the designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. Your name, please? A woman at the registration desk smiled warmly. Julia Matthews. I'm supposed to help with. She trailed off, suddenly uncertain about her role. Oh yes, Jack mentioned you'd be coming. The woman handed her a name tag and a folder. You'll be helping coordinate the silent auction tables. Julia pinned the name tag to her dress and scanned the crowded ballroom. That's when she saw him, Jack. But this wasn't the leather-clad biker she'd helped off the sidewalk. This Jack wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. His beard was neatly trimmed, and his usually wild hair was styled professionally. He stood surrounded by a group of people who seemed to hang on his every word. Quite different, isn't he? A voice beside her made her jump. An elegant older woman had appeared at her elbow. I'm Margaret, one of the board members. Jack always cleans up nice for these events, though I suspect he'd rather be in his riding boots. Julia managed a small smile. I barely recognized him. Come on, Margaret said, linking her arm through Julia's. Let me introduce you to some people before you start your duties. They wove through the crowd, stopping at various groups. Julia met Sarah, who owned a chain of local restaurants, David, who ran a staffing agency, and Michael, whose marketing firm was always looking for administrative support. Each conversation felt like an informal interview, with Margaret subtly highlighting Julia's skills and work ethic. And this, Margaret said, approaching Jack's group, is our mysterious benefactor himself. Jack turned, and for a moment, Julia caught a flash of the same vulnerability she'd seen when he was injured on the sidewalk. Then his professional mask slipped back into place. Julia, glad you made it. His voice was warm but measured. "Everyone, this is the woman I was telling you about. The one who stopped to help me after my accident." The group's attention shifted to her, and Julia felt her cheeks warm. A distinguished-looking man in his 50s stepped forward. "So you're the Good Samaritan? I'm Thomas Chun. I own several businesses in the area, including that diner you used to work at." Julia's heart skipped a beat. "Oh, Don't worry," Thomas said, shooting a pointed look at Jack. "I heard about what happened. That manager has been dealt with. In fact, we're looking for someone to help manage the place properly." Julia's mind whirled. She looked at Jack, who kept his expression carefully neutral, but there was a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. All these people, all these opportunities, it seemed too good to be true. Her natural caution warred with desperate hope. "The silent auction is about to start," Margaret announced, squeezing Julia's arm. "We should get you to your station." As Julia followed Margaret, she glanced back at Jack. He gave her a slight nod, as if to say, "Trust this." But years of struggling had taught Julia that nothing came without strings attached. Still, as she took her place behind the auction tables, she couldn't help but feel a flutter of possibility in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the break she needed. The buzz of conversation filled the ballroom as the charity event wound down. Julia's feet ached from standing at the auction tables, but a sense of accomplishment warmed her chest. She'd helped raise thousands of dollars for children in need. Jack appeared beside her, 2 glasses of water in his hands. "You look like you could use a break." He gestured toward a quiet corner where a few empty tables stood apart from the crowd. "Join me." Julia nodded, grateful to sit down. The chair's plush cushioning felt like heaven after hours on her feet. Jack settled across from her, his suit jacket now draped over the back of his chair, ties slightly loosened. "You did great tonight," he said, passing her a glass. "Margaret couldn't stop singing your praises." Julia took a sip of water. "This whole evening feels surreal." She studied him, noting how different he looked from the injured biker she'd helped just days ago. "Speaking of surreal, who are you really?" Jack's fingers drummed against his water glass. His shoulders tensed, then relaxed as he seemed to come to a decision. "I guess I owe you the truth." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The man you helped on the street. That's part of who I am. But this," he gestured to his suit, to the elegant ballroom around them, "this is also me." "I don't understand," Julia said, shaking her head. "I used to be just a biker, full-time Hell's Angel, living wild and free. Made some choices I'm not proud of." His eyes grew distant. 10 years ago, I hit rock bottom, nearly died in a bar fight. While I was recovering, I realized I needed a change." Julia listened intently, watching emotions play across his usually guarded face. "I had some money saved up. Not all of it earned honestly," he admitted, "but I used it to start legitimate businesses. Small ones at first, a garage, then a trucking company. Now I own dozens of enterprises across the state." He gave a wry smile. "Most people know me as James Harrison, respectable businessman. Only a few know both sides of me." Julia sat back, stunned. "So, when you offered to help me—" "I meant it," Jack said firmly. "But I wanted you to see this world first, to understand what kind of help I could really offer." He spread his hands. "I keep the biker persona because it reminds me where I came from. Keeps me humble. But everything else, the businesses, the charity work, that's my real life now. It's a lot to take in," Julia said honestly, trying to reconcile the leather-clad biker with the powerful businessman before her. "I know," Jack nodded. "And there's more to tell. Would you have lunch with me tomorrow? I'd like to explain everything properly, my businesses, my connections, and how I think I can help you build something for yourself and Ethan." Julia hesitated, her mind spinning with questions. This man had already upended her life, once by crashing his motorcycle. Now he was offering to do it again, but deliberately this time and with purpose. "Just lunch," Jack added softly. "At that little cafe on Main Street. Public place, middle of the day. No pressure, just conversation." Julia looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of deception. Instead, she found only sincerity and something that looked a lot like hope. "Okay," she said finally. "Lunch tomorrow. The lunch crowd at Main Street Cafe bustled around them, creating a comfortable blanket of background noise. Julia watched as Jack stirred his coffee, his massive hands looking out of place holding the delicate spoon. He'd traded his suit from last night for a plain black t-shirt that did little to hide his tattoos. "I appreciate you meeting me," he said, setting the spoon down. "I know all of this must seem pretty overwhelming." Julia wrapped her hand around her own coffee mug. "That's putting it mildly. Yesterday, I thought you were just a biker I helped. Now I find out you're some kind of business tycoon." "Nothing that dramatic," Jack said with a small smile. "Just someone who got lucky enough to get a second chance at life." Their sandwiches arrived, and Jack waited until the server left before continuing. "When I hit rock bottom, I was angry at the world. Thought everyone owed me something." He took a bite of his sandwich, chewing thoughtfully. "It took nearly dying to wake me up." "What changed?" Julia asked, picking at her own lunch. "I realized I was the problem. All that anger, all that violence, it was eating me up inside." Jack's voice grew quieter. "Had this moment of clarity in the hospital. Either I could die young and angry, or I could try to do something good with whatever time I had left." Julia nodded, thinking of her own struggles. "It's not easy starting over." "No, it's not," Jack agreed. "First few years were the hardest. Old friends tried to pull me back in, legitimate businesses not wanting to work with me because of my background." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing more tattoos. "Can't exactly hide who I used to be." "But you did it anyway," Julia said. "Yeah, started small, fixed up bikes legally, hired other guys who wanted out of the life. Learned about business management, took some classes." He smiled. "Turns out I had a knack for it." Julia studied him. "Why keep the biker image at all?" "Reminds me where I came from. Keeps me honest." Jack leaned back in his chair. "Plus, sometimes it's useful. People underestimate you when you look like this." Their conversation paused as the server refilled their coffee cups. Julia stirred cream into hers, processing everything she'd heard. "That's why I want to help you, Julia," Jack continued. "When you stopped to help me on that sidewalk, you didn't see a scary biker or a business owner. You just saw someone who needed help. Anyone would have done the same." Julia protested. "No, they wouldn't have. Trust me, I've seen plenty of people cross the street to avoid me." Jack's eyes met hers. "You lost your job because you showed kindness to a stranger. Let me return that kindness." Julia felt tears prick at her eyes. I've always handled everything on my own. Since Ethan's father left, it's been just us." "Being strong doesn't mean you have to do everything alone," Jack said gently. "The loan offer still stands. No strings attached, reasonable interest rate, flexible repayment schedule." Julia took a deep breath. The proud part of her wanted to refuse, but she thought of Ethan, of the bills piling up at home. "Can I think about it?" "Of course," Jack nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Looking at him now, Julia saw beyond both the intimidating biker and the successful businessman. She saw someone who understood what it meant to struggle, to fight for a better life. Maybe, just maybe, she could trust him to help her do the same. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being honest with me." Julia stared at her phone, rereading the promising email from a local restaurant looking for an experienced server. Her fingers hovered over the reply button when her phone buzzed with an incoming call from Ethan's school. "Mrs. Matthews?" The principal's voice was stern. "We need you to come to the school immediately. There's been an incident involving Ethan." Her heart sank as she grabbed her purse and car keys. The drive to school felt endless, her mind racing with possibilities. When she arrived at the principal's office, she found Ethan sitting in a chair, his head down, shoulders slumped. Ethan got into a fight during recess. The principal explained, gesturing for Julia to sit. He punched another student. Julia's mouth fell open. That doesn't sound like him at all. The other boy was making fun of him for wearing the same clothes all week. The principal continued, his expression softening. And for not having lunch money. Julia's chest tightened. She'd been stretching their groceries thin, trying to make everything last until she found work. She hadn't realized Ethan's classmates had noticed. "I'm sorry, Mom." Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. "Tommy said we were poor, and that's why you lost your job." He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. He said that's why Dad left us. Julia pulled Ethan into a tight hug, fighting back her own tears. Oh, sweetheart. The principal cleared his throat. Given the circumstances, we're giving Ethan a warning this time. But he needs to understand that violence isn't the answer. After a lengthy discussion about proper behavior and conflict resolution, Julia drove them home. The job lead would have to wait. Right now, her son needed her more. At home, Ethan curled up on their worn couch while Julia made him hot chocolate with the last of their milk. They talked about feelings, about better ways to handle bullies, about how sometimes life got hard but they would always have each other. The doorbell rang just as the sun was setting. Julia opened it to find Jack standing there, holding 2 large paper bags. "Thought you might need some groceries," he said, lifting the bags slightly. "Mind if I come in?" Julia glanced around their small living room, noticing the worn furniture and bare walls with fresh eyes. "It's not much," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "Hi, Mr. Jack," Ethan said quietly from the couch. Jack set the bags on their small kitchen counter and started unpacking them. "Rough day, kid." Ethan nodded, and Julia was surprised to see her usually chatty son fall silent. "I got a call from school," Julia explained in a low voice as she helped put away the groceries. "Some kids are giving him a hard time about." She swallowed hard. "About our situation." Jack's expression darkened. "Kids can be cruel." "I should have seen it coming," Julia said, leaning against the counter. "I've been so focused on finding work, I didn't realize how much this was affecting him. The old clothes, the packed lunches getting smaller." Her voice cracked. "I'm failing him." "Hey," Jack said firmly. "You're not failing anyone. You're fighting. There's a difference." Julia looked at the groceries, fresh fruits, vegetables, milk, bread, even some treats for Ethan, and felt overwhelmed by Jack's kindness. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Jack replied. "Sometimes we all need a little help getting back on our feet." Julia stood in her small kitchen, methodically putting away the groceries Jack had brought. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed a carton of milk in the refrigerator, its emptiness making the simple gesture feel like a stark reminder of their situation. "Julia," Jack said, his deep voice gentle. "Can we talk for a minute?" She nodded, glancing at Ethan, who had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from the emotional day. They moved to the tiny dining area, where Julia's unpaid bills lay scattered across the table. She quickly gathered them, trying to hide them from view, but Jack's eyes had already noticed. "I know you're proud," he began, settling into one of the mismatched chairs. "And you have every right to be. But I can see you're drowning here." Julia sank into the chair across from him, her shoulders heavy with the weight of her responsibilities. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "Those bills aren't going anywhere," Jack said, nodding toward the stack of papers in her hands. "And job hunting takes time. Let me help you get caught up." Julia's throat tightened. "I can't accept that. It's too much." "You can, and you will pay me back," Jack insisted, his eyes serious. "With interest, if that makes you feel better. But right now, you need breathing room." She looked toward Ethan, peacefully sleeping on the couch. His face still showed traces of dried tears, and her heart clenched remembering his words from earlier about the bullying at school. "I've been independent for so long," Julia whispered, her voice catching. "After my ex left, I promised myself I'd never rely on anyone else again." Jack leaned forward, his massive frame making the small chair creak. "Being strong doesn't mean you have to do everything alone. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is accept help when you need it." Julia's eyes burned as she looked at the bills in her hands. Electricity, water, rent, all overdue. The red stamps and final notices seemed to blur together. She started, then took a deep breath. "I don't want to feel like I owe anyone anything." "You saved my life," Jack reminded her quietly. "If anything, I'm the one who owes you. But this isn't about owing. It's about helping someone who deserves a break." Julia sat in silence for a long moment, listening to Ethan's soft breathing from the living room. Finally, she placed the stack of bills on the table between them. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to set up a payment plan. Something formal." Jack nodded, relief visible in his features. We can do that. Tomorrow, I'll have my accountant draw up proper paperwork. Everything above board and professional. He stood up, his presence filling the small dining area. For now, get some rest. You've had a rough day. Julia walked him to the door, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. As she opened it, the cool evening air rushed in. Thank you, she said, meaning it for more than just the bills or the groceries. Jack gave her a small nod and headed toward his car. Julia watched him leave, then closed the door softly. She leaned against it, her mind swirling with thoughts about the future. The weight of accepting help sat uncomfortably in her chest. But alongside it was something else, a tiny spark of relief, like taking the first proper breath after being underwater for too long. Jack sat in his office, staring at the threatening message on his phone. The Blood Riders, his old rival gang, had discovered his legitimate business empire. Their message was clear: either pay protection money or face the consequences. He placed the phone face down on his mahogany desk and rubbed his temples. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his downtown office, casting long shadows across the room. Everything he'd built over the past 5 years, the chain of auto repair shops, the real estate holdings, the investment firm, all of it was at risk. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Harris, the security team is here for the meeting." "Send them in," Jack replied, his voice gruff. 3 men in suits entered, led by Mike, his head of security. They'd worked together since Jack's biker days, and Mike was one of the few who knew his full story. "The Blood Riders have been spotted near 3 of our locations," Mike reported, spreading photos across the desk. "They're watching, gathering intel. Classic intimidation tactics." Jack studied the photos, recognizing some faces from his past life. "Any direct contact?" "Not yet," Mike answered. "But word is they're planning something big. They think you've gone soft." The words hung in the air like smoke. Jack thought of Julia and Ethan, of the charity events he now attended, of the legitimate businessman he'd become. Had he gone soft? Or had he finally found something worth protecting? His phone buzzed again, another message from the Blood Riders. This time with photos of his main office building, his home, his favorite restaurant. They were getting bolder. "Double security at all locations," Jack ordered, standing up. "And give me everything you can on their current operations. If they want to play this game, we'll play it smart." As his team discussed logistics, Jack's thoughts drifted to Julia. She'd trusted him, let him help her despite her reservations. How would she react if she knew the danger surrounding him now? The thought of her disappointment, or worse, her fear, made his chest tight. The meeting continued for another hour, contingency plans being laid out like battle strategies. Just as they were wrapping up, Jack's phone rang. Julia's name flashed on the screen. "Excuse me," he said to his team, stepping away. "Julia?" "Jack." Her voice was hesitant. I heard some things about you being involved with dangerous people." He closed his eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "Everything's fine," he assured her, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just some business complications." "Are you sure?" she pressed. "Because people are talking about bikers showing up at your businesses, and I'm worried, Dash." "Julia," he cut in gentler now. "I promise you, I'm handling it. You don't need to worry." There was a pause on the line. "You would tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" Jack looked out his office window at the city below, spotting 2 Blood Riders on motorcycles circling the block. His jaw tightened. "Of course," he lied, hating himself for it. "Everything's under control." But even as he spoke the words, he could feel his carefully constructed world beginning to crack. The weight of his past pressed down on him like a physical thing, threatening to crush everything he'd built, including his newfound friendship with Julia. The cafe was nearly empty when Julia arrived. The afternoon lull, leaving only a few scattered customers nursing their coffee cups. Jack sat at a corner table, his broad frame making the delicate cafe chair look absurdly small. His suit was impeccable, but his expression was tense. "Thanks for coming," he said, standing as Julia approached. She noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands as he pulled out her chair. "You said it was important," Julia replied, settling into her seat. The waiter brought over 2 steaming cups of coffee, She hadn't seen Jack order. Jack leaned forward, his voice low. I need your help with something. A business project. Julia wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup, studying his face. What kind of project? I'm opening a new community center, he explained, pulling out a folder. It'll provide job training, childcare, support for single parents, everything you've told me you wished existed when you were struggling. He spread out architectural plans and budget sheets across the table. Julia's eyes widened at the numbers involved. I want you to run it, Jack continued. You understand what these families need. You've lived it. Julia's heart raced. The opportunity was incredible, exactly what she dreamed of doing. But something in Jack's intensity made her uneasy. Why now? She asked carefully. With everything that's happening with your businesses? Jack's jaw tightened. This is separate from all that. This is about giving back to the community. Is it? Julia pressed. Or is this about making your business look more legitimate? The words hung between them. Jack's expression flickered with hurt before settling back into careful neutrality. Both, he admitted finally. But that doesn't make the good it could do any less real. Julia looked down at the plans again. The facility would be beautiful, safe spaces for children, counseling rooms, job training centers. Everything she'd wished for during her darkest days. I don't know, Jack, she said slowly. This feels complicated. Life is complicated, he countered. But sometimes good things can come from messy situations. Julia thought of Ethan, of the life she wanted to build for him. And what happens when your messy situations put the center at risk? When they put the families who depend on it at risk? Jack reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. I would never let that happen. But you can't guarantee that, can you? Julia pulled her hand back, standing up. I've worked too hard to keep Ethan safe, to build something stable for him. I can't risk getting involved in something that might put that in danger. Julia, please dash. I need time to think, she said, gathering her purse. She looked at the plans one last time, her heart aching at the possibility they represented. I'm sorry, Jack. As she walked away from the cafe, her steps felt heavy. Part of her wanted to turn back, to take the chance Jack was offering. She thought of his kindness, his genuine desire to help others, the way he looked at her like she was capable of anything. But then she thought of the mysterious phone calls he took, the worried looks from his security team, the rumors of dangerous people circling his businesses. She thought of Ethan's bright smile, his future stretching out before him. Julia kept walking, her thoughts a tangled mess of hope and fear, possibility and danger. The weight of the decision pressed down on her shoulders with each step she took away from Jack. Julia sat at her kitchen table, staring at the pile of bills spread before her. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the worn linoleum floor, and her hands trembled as she sorted through the paperwork. The community center plans Jack had shown her kept floating through her mind, taunting her with possibilities she wasn't sure she could risk. A sob escaped her throat before she could stop it. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to muffle the sound, but the tears came anyway. Everything felt like it was slipping through her fingers. Her stability, her independence, her certainty about what was right and wrong. Mom! Ethan's voice came from the doorway. She quickly wiped her eyes, but he had already seen. I'm okay, sweetie. She tried to smile, but her voice cracked. Ethan walked over, his small face serious. Without a word, he wrapped his arms around her shoulders, hugging her tight. You don't have to pretend with me, Mom. I know things are hard. Julia's heart squeezed her chest. She pulled back to look at her son, amazed by the wisdom in his young eyes. When did you get so grown up? He shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. I learned from you. You're always telling me it's okay to feel sad sometimes. Fresh tears spilled down Julia's cheeks, but these were different, pride mixed with a bittersweet ache. You're right. I want to give you everything, Ethan. A better life than this. But we have each other, Ethan said simply. And now we have Jack too. Julia's breath caught. Jack's complicated, honey. He makes you smile, Ethan observed. And he helped us when we needed it. That's not complicated. A knock at the door interrupted them. Julia wiped her eyes quickly and went to answer it, Ethan close behind her. Jack stood on the porch, holding a paper bag from the local deli. "I thought you might be hungry," he said softly, his eyes taking in her tear-stained face with concern. "Hi, Jack." Ethan brightened. "Mom's sad today." "Ethan," Julia started, but Jack was already kneeling down to Ethan's level. "Sometimes grown-ups get sad too," he said seriously. "But you know what helps? Having someone to talk to. Think you could go play in your room for a bit while I talk to your mom?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "Take care of her, okay?" Julia watched her son disappear down the hall, then turned to Jack. He stood there quietly, patient and steady, like a rock in a stormy sea. The afternoon light caught his face, softening his usual tough exterior, and she could see the genuine concern in his eyes. "I'm sorry about earlier," she said, her voice rough. "Don't be." Jack set the food on the counter and turned to face her. "You were right to ask those questions. To protect what matters to you. It's not just that," Julia admitted. "I'm scared of depending on someone again, of trusting." "I know," Jack said simply. He didn't move to touch her or offer empty promises. He just stood there, solid and present, letting her see him, really see him. In that moment, she noticed the little things, how he always positioned himself to give her space, how he treated Ethan with respect instead of condescension, how he never pushed when she pulled away. They stood in the quiet kitchen, the late sun painting everything in soft gold, and Julia felt something shift inside her. Jack wasn't just the tough biker who'd crashed outside her diner, or the successful businessman with a complicated past. He was someone who showed up again and again, asking nothing in return. The kitchen felt warmer now, less oppressive than it had moments ago. Julia sat at the small table while Jack pulled up a chair across from her, his large frame making the furniture seem almost comically small. He'd insisted they eat first, simple turkey sandwiches and chips from the deli, before talking business. "I've been thinking," Jack began, his deep voice gentle. He folded his hands on the table, his tattoos visible beneath his rolled-up sleeves. "About what you said earlier about needing stability." Juliet tensed slightly, bracing herself. She'd learned that good things rarely came without strings attached. "I want to offer you a position at Harris Enterprises," he continued, meeting her gaze steadily. "Not just any position. I want you on my management team." Julia blinked, certain she'd misheard. "Your management team?" Jack nodded, leaning forward slightly. "I've watched how you handle problems, Julia. How you think things through. You've got something most people don't, real understanding of what it means to struggle and succeed." She shook her head, confusion evident on her face. "But I don't have any experience in Dash." "Experience isn't everything," Jack cut in gently. "I need someone who can see both sides of things. Someone who understands what it's like to work from the bottom up. Someone who cares about more than just profit margins." Julia's mind raced. The position would mean stability, a real salary, benefits for Ethan. But it would also mean becoming deeply involved in Jack's world, a world she still wasn't sure she fully understood. "The job would involve overseeing several of our community outreach programs," Jack explained, his voice steady and clear. "You'd help manage our charitable initiatives, work with local businesses, coordinate with our other departments. It's not just pushing papers. It's about making real changes in people's lives." Julia's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. "Why me?" Jack's expression softened. "Because you stopped to help a stranger when everyone else walked by. Because you put your son first, always, but you never stopped thinking about how to help others too. Because you're smart, capable, and you deserve a chance to prove it." He pulled out a folder from his leather messenger bag and placed it on the table. "This is the formal offer. Take it home, read it over. There's no pressure to decide right now." Julia stared at the folder, her mind whirling with possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider. A real career, not just a job. A chance to make a difference, to build something meaningful. But also a chance to fail spectacularly, to disappoint not just herself but Jack too. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice uncertain. It's a lot to take in." "I know it is," Jack agreed. "And that's exactly why you're right for this. You don't jump in without thinking. You consider all angles. That's what I need." Julia picked up the folder, its weight feeling somehow significant in her hands. For the first time in years, she felt like she was standing at a crossroads where both paths might lead somewhere good. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "Take your time," Jack said, standing up. "Think it through. Talk it over with Ethan. The offer isn't going anywhere." Julia nodded, still staring at the folder. Inside were pages that could change her life, and Ethan's forever. She had options now, real ones, not just the desperate choices she'd been forced to make in the past. The realization left her breathless, caught between hope and fear. Julia stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting her newly bought navy blazer. The price tag had made her wince, but Jack had insisted that proper business attire was essential. Her reflection showed someone she barely recognized. Gone were the waitress uniform and comfortable sneakers, replaced by professional clothing and sensible heels. "You look pretty, Mom," Ethan said from the doorway, still in his pajamas. His smile was encouraging, but she could see the worry in his eyes. "Thanks, sweetie." She knelt down to his level, careful not to wrinkle her clothes. "Mrs. Thompson will pick you up from school today, okay? I'll be home for dinner, I promise." The Harris Enterprises building stood tall in the business district, its glass windows reflecting the morning sun. Julia's hands trembled as she clutched her new employee badge. The security guard nodded at her, and she made her way to the elevator, surrounded by people in suits carrying briefcases and coffee cups. Jack met her in the lobby of the executive floor. He wore a crisp black suit that transformed him from the intimidating biker she'd first met into something equally imposing, but differently so. His tattoos were hidden beneath his sleeves, but his presence still commanded attention. "Ready?" he asked, his voice gentle despite his formal appearance. Julia nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "As I'll ever be." The morning passed in a blur of introductions and orientations. Her office, her actual office with a door and a window, was modest but clean and professional. The computer system was more complex than anything she'd used before, and the employee handbook was thicker than some novel she'd read. During lunch, she sat alone in the break room, watching others chat in their established groups. A few people smiled politely, but most seemed too busy with their own conversations to notice her. She picked at her sandwich, missing the familiar chaos of the diner. The afternoon brought her first real task, reviewing applications for their community grant program. As she read through stories of struggling small businesses and ambitious community projects, she felt a spark of purpose. This was something she understood, people trying to make better lives for themselves and others. By 5 o'clock, her head was swimming with new information, policies, and procedures. As she gathered her things, Jack appeared in her doorway. "How was day one?" he asked, leaning against the frame. "Overwhelming," Julia admitted. "But interesting. You'll get the hang of it," he assured her. "The first week is always the hardest." She nodded, slipping her new laptop into its bag. "Why did you really give me this job, Jack? There must have been dozens of more qualified candidates." Jack's expression remained neutral, but his eyes softened. "Because you have something they don't, real understanding of what our community programs mean to people. The others see numbers on spreadsheets. You see the faces behind them." On the bus ride home, Julia watched the city pass by through the window. Her feet ached from the new shoes, and her mind was exhausted from trying to absorb so much information. But beneath the fatigue was a flutter of excitement, or maybe anxiety. She couldn't quite tell the difference anymore. She thought about Jack's words, about his apparent faith in her abilities. Part of her wanted to believe in his sincerity, to trust that his intentions were as straightforward as he claimed. But another part, the part that had learned hard lessons about trust, wondered what he wasn't telling her. The bus stopped at her corner, and Julia stepped out into the evening air. Her old life as a waitress seemed distant now, like a fading dream. She just hoped this new dream wouldn't turn into a nightmare. Julia was organizing grant applications in her office when Ray's voices from down the hall caught her attention. She recognized Jack's deep rumble, but it carried an edge she'd never heard before. Setting down the folder she was holding, she moved closer to her partially open door. "This isn't up for discussion. Marcus," Jack's voice resonated through the hallway. "I left that life behind. Tell them to back off." They're not taking no for an answer, Big Jack, a gruff voice responded. The Devils want their territory back, and they think you've gone soft with all this business stuff. Julia's hand flew to her mouth. She'd heard of the Devils. They were the most notorious biker gang in the state. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she continued listening. I don't care what they think, Jack growled. I built this legitimate business from nothing. I'm not letting them destroy it. They torched 2 of your warehouses last night, Marcus said, his voice lowering. Next time it might not be empty buildings. The sound of something heavy hitting a wall made Julia jump. She could picture Jack's massive fist leaving a dent in the plaster. If they want a war, they'll get one. Jack's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. But not like before. I've got lawyers now. Real power. Lawyers won't stop a bullet, Jack. The conversation continued in hushed tones that Julia couldn't make out. She stepped back from a door, her hands trembling. The Jack she knew, the businessman who helped single mothers and funded community projects, seemed to fade away, replaced by the image of a hardened biker facing down violent rivals. Later that afternoon, she knocked on Jack's office door. He looked up from his computer, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. Come in, he said, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Julia closed the door behind her. I heard you earlier, she said quietly. About the Devils. Jack's expression hardened for a moment before he sighed, running a hand through his beard. You weren't supposed to hear that. Are you in danger? She moved closer to his desk, studying his face. Are we in danger? Julia. Jack stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow across the office. I promise you, everything's under control. This is just old business being settled. Old business involving burned warehouses. Her voice shook slightly. That doesn't sound under control to me. I have security teams, lawyers, connections with legitimate law enforcement now. Jack explained, his tone gentle but firm. This isn't like the old days. The Devils are living in the past, thinking violence is still the answer. Julia wrapped her arms around herself, remembering the conversation she'd overheard. They think you've gone soft, she said. What happens when they decide to prove it? Jack moved around his desk to stand in front of her. Nothing is going to happen to you or this company. I've worked too hard to build this new life. Trust me. But as Julia looked up at him, she saw something in his eyes that made her stomach twist, a flicker of uncertainty, a shadow of doubt. Despite his reassurances, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to spin wildly out of control. I want to believe you, she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet office. Jack reached out as if to touch her shoulder, but stopped himself. Everything will be fine, he repeated, but the words sounded hollow even to her ears. The harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room burned Julia's eyes as she paced the waiting area. Her phone buzzed again, another message from the office asking for updates. She couldn't bring herself to respond. The image of Jack lying in that parking lot, blood seeping through his shirt, was seared into her mind. It had happened so fast. One minute she was walking to her car after work, and the next she heard the roar of motorcycles. Through the chaos that followed, she remembered Jack's massive frame moving to shield others as shots rang out. Then he was on the ground. Ms. Matthews. A nurse appeared, clipboard in hand. Mr. Harris is in surgery now. Do you have his medical power of attorney? Julia shook her head, suddenly feeling like an outsider. I work for him. I'm his friend. The word felt inadequate to describe their complicated relationship. I see. The nurse's expression softened. Is there family we should contact? I don't know, Julia admitted, her voice cracking. I don't know if he has any family. How is it possible to care so much about someone and know so little about their personal life? She sank into an uncomfortable plastic chair, her hands shaking as she tried to piece together what had happened. The Devils had made good on their threats. She remembered the screech of tires, the glint of metal, the look of grim determination on Jack's face as he pushed people to safety. Hours crawled by. Julia called Ethan's babysitter to explain she'd be late. She tried to eat the sandwich someone brought her, but it tasted like cardboard. The waiting room television droned on about local news, none of it matching compared to what was happening behind those surgery doors. Excuse me. A deep voice pulled her from her thoughts. Two police officers stood before her, notebooks ready. "We need to ask you some questions about the shooting." Julia recounted what she could, her voice mechanical. Yes, there were multiple shooters. No, she couldn't identify them. Yes, they were on motorcycles. The officers exchanged glances at her mention of the devils, but said nothing. After they left, a doctor appeared, still wearing his surgical scrubs. Julia's heart stopped as she tried to read his expression. "The surgery is ongoing," he said, his face grave. "Mr. Harris sustained multiple gunshot wounds. We're doing everything we can, but—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "His condition is critical. The next few hours will be crucial." Julia nodded numbly, barely hearing the medical terms he used. Something about blood loss, organ damage, complications. All she could think about was Jack's last conscious moment, when he'd looked at her with those steel blue eyes and tried to smile despite the pain. "You should go home, get some rest," the doctor suggested gently. "We'll call if there's any change." But Julia couldn't move. How could she leave when Jack had never left her side when she needed help? She thought about all the times he'd shown up at her door, offering support when everything seemed hopeless. Now she sat in the sterile hospital waiting room, surrounded by strangers hurrying past, while somewhere behind those swinging doors, Jack fought for his life. The man who'd changed her world, who'd given her hope when she had none, was hanging by a thread. Her phone buzzed again. Ethan's worried voice filled her ear. "Mom, are you okay? When are you coming home?" Julia closed her eyes, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "Soon, baby," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just need to stay a little longer. Jack, he needs someone here." She hung up, staring at the surgery doors, willing them to open with good news. But they remained closed, holding their secrets, while Julia's world teetered on the edge of chaos. 3 days after the shooting, Julia walked down the sterile hospital corridor, her footsteps echoing off the polished floors. The rhythmic beeping of monitors grew louder as she approached Jack's room. She paused at the doorway, taking in the sight of him. Jack, big Jack. Harris looked anything but big lying in that hospital bed. Tubes and wires snaked around him, his usual commanding presence diminished by white sheets and bandages. His eyes were closed, but she knew he wasn't sleeping. His fingers tapped restlessly against the blanket. "You can come in," he said without opening his eyes. "I can hear you thinking from here." Julia stepped into the room, setting her purse down on a chair. "How did you know it was me?" "Your perfume." He opened his eyes, managing a weak smile. "Vanilla and coffee." She sat down beside his bed, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the way he winced slightly with each breath. The doctors had said he was lucky. A few inches difference, and the bullets would have hit vital organs. "We need to talk, Jack." Julia's voice was quiet but firm. "About what happened. About all of this." He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. "There's nothing to talk about. It's being handled." "Being handled?" Julia leaned forward, her hands gripping the bed rail. "You almost died. There was so much blood." Her voice cracked. I thought that was it. That I'd have to tell Ethan that another person we care about was gone." Jack's expression softened. "Julia, I'm sorry. I never meant for you to get caught up in this. But I'm caught up in it." She stood up, pacing the small room. "Every time I close my eyes, I see you lying there in that parking lot. I hear those motorcycles, those gunshots." She turned to face him. "How can you live like this? Always looking over your shoulder, waiting for the next attack." Jack was quiet for a long moment, his jaw clenching. "I've been trying to get out, to do things right. But my past, it doesn't want to let go." "And what about your future?" Julia's voice was barely above a whisper. "What about the people who care about you now?" His eyes met hers, filled with a pain that had nothing to do with his physical wounds. "I'm scared," he admitted. "For the first time in my life, I have something to lose. My businesses, my reputation." He reached for her hand. "You." Julia didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. "I need to know if you're serious about changing. Really changing. Because I can't. I can't watch you die, Jack. I can't put Ethan through that." "I want to change," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. but I don't know if I can do it alone. I've been alone for so long, fighting my own battles. He tightened his grip on her hand. I need you, Julia. Your strength, your belief in second chances. Julia looked at their joined hands, remembering how those same hands had helped her when she was at her lowest. I believe in you, Jack. I've seen the good in you, but you have to choose it. Every day, no more half measures. Julia sat in her small kitchen, staring at the stack of unopened bills on the table. Ethan's homework lay scattered nearby, math problems half finished. The clock ticked loudly on the wall, marking each second of her indecision. She picked up her phone, scrolling through the missed calls from Jack. 3 days had passed since their conversation in the hospital, and her mind kept circling back to the same thoughts. The image of Jack lying in that hospital bed, vulnerable and hurting, twisted something inside her chest. The front door creaked open, and Ethan's backpack hit the floor with a thud. Mom, are we going to visit Jack today? Julia's heart clenched at the hope in his voice. Over the past months, Ethan had grown attached to Jack, finding in him the father figure he'd never had. Come here, sweetie. We need to talk. Ethan approached slowly, his expression wary. He'd seen that look on his mother's face before, usually before bad news. Is Jack okay? He's getting better, Julia assured him, pulling out a chair. But we need to talk about some changes. What kind of changes? Ethan slumped into the seat, his shoulders tense. Julia reached across the table, taking his small hands in hers. You know how sometimes we have to make hard choices to keep the people we love safe? Ethan nodded slowly. Like when we moved away from Dad? Yes, exactly like that. Julia squeezed his hands. I think we need to take a step back from seeing Jack for a while. But why? Ethan's voice cracked. He needs us. He's hurt. I know, baby. Julia fought back tears. But what happened to Jack? The people who hurt him, they're dangerous. And my job as your mom is to keep you safe. But Jack keeps us safe. Ethan protested. He helps us with money and food and Dash. And I'm so grateful for that. Julia interrupted gently. But Jack's world, it's complicated. There are people who want to hurt him, and I can't risk you getting caught in the middle of that. Ethan pulled his hands away, anger and confusion warring on his face. So we're just going to leave him? Like Dad left us. The comparison hit Julia like a physical blow. No, honey, this isn't the same thing at all. We're not abandoning Jack. We're giving him time to sort things out, to make his life safer. For all of us. Does he know? Julia shook her head. Not yet. I'm going to tell him today. Can I come with you? Ethan's eyes pleaded with her. Not this time, Julia said softly. This is something I need to do alone. She watched as Ethan stormed off to his room, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through their small apartment, matching the hollow feeling in her chest. She pulled out her phone and typed a quick message to Jack. Can we talk? I'll be there in an hour. Her finger hovered over the send button. She thought about all Jack had done for them. The financial help, the emotional support, the way he'd brought stability back into their lives. But then she remembered the gunshots, the blood, the terror of thinking he was dead. She thought about Ethan, sleeping peacefully in his bed, unaware of how quickly life could change. With a deep breath, she pressed send. This wasn't about abandoning Jack. It was about protecting her son while Jack figured out his path. She had to believe he would understand, that he would fight to make things right. She had to believe this wasn't goodbye, but rather a necessary pause in their story. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty parking lot as Julia sat in her car, watching Jack's office building from a distance. She'd been doing this every few days for the past 3 weeks, always staying far enough away to remain unnoticed. Today was different, though. Today she saw moving trucks. Through her windshield, she observed as workers carried out old furniture and brought in new pieces. The worn sign that had hung above the entrance for years was being replaced with a sleek, professional one. Even from here, she could see Jack directing the workers, his movements still careful from his healing injuries. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, her friend who worked as Jack's secretary. He's really doing it, Julia. Complete reorganization. Cut ties with everyone from his old life. Even changed the company's name. Julia's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She'd asked Sarah to keep her updated, needing to know that Jack was serious about his promises. Every day brought new changes: security cameras being installed, legitimate business contracts being signed, old associates being dismissed. Through the building's large windows, she watched as Jack stood at his desk, speaking with men in suits. Real businessmen, not the leather-clad figures she'd grown used to seeing. He looked different, too. His beard was neatly trimmed, his tattoos covered by a crisp dress shirt. But it was more than just his appearance. There was a new purpose in his stance. Another text from Sarah arrived. He's hired a security firm. Professional one. No more friends handling protection. Julia felt a weight lift from her chest. Each update confirmed what she'd hoped. Jack was serious about change. She watched as he shook hands with the businessmen, his movements confident but different from his old swagger. This wasn't the intimidating biker who'd crashed his motorcycle months ago. This was someone new. Workers continued their tasks around the building, replacing old security gates with modern systems. Julia recognized some of Jack's former associates leaving the premises, boxes in hand. Their expressions were dark, but they left without confrontation. She knew this couldn't have been easy for Jack. These were men he'd considered brothers once. Through the window, she saw Jack step into his office alone. He moved to stand at the window, looking out over the parking lot. Julia ducked lower in her seat, though she knew she was too far away to be spotted. For a moment, he stood there, hands in his pockets, surveying the changes taking place below. Sarah's final text of the day arrived. He asked about you again. Said, whenever you're ready, there's still a place for you here. But he understands if you need more time. Julia watched as Jack turned away from the window and returned to his desk. Even from this distance, she could see the determination in his movements as he focused on a stack of papers. Real business documents, not the shady dealings of his past. The sun was setting now, casting an orange glow over the renovated building. Julia started her car, but didn't leave immediately. She thought about Ethan, who still asked about Jack every day. She thought about the promise she'd made to keep her son safe. And she thought about Jack, working tirelessly to become someone worthy of their trust. As the last of the moving trucks pulled away, Julia saw Jack emerge from the building. He paused on the steps, looking around at the transformed property. Even from here, she could see the mix of pride and uncertainty on his face. This was a man trying to rebuild himself from the ground up. Julia stood in the crowd outside the courthouse, her heart pounding as she watched Jack descend the steps. News cameras flashed around him while his lawyer made a statement about the dismissal of all charges. Jack looked different now. His suit was perfectly tailored, his beard neatly trimmed, and his demeanor calm and collected. The court has thoroughly reviewed all evidence and found no basis for the allegations against Mr. Harris, the lawyer announced. My client has been completely cleared of any wrongdoing. Julia noticed how Jack handled himself with dignity. There was no gloating, no angry outbursts at his accusers. He simply nodded respectfully to the press and made his way to his waiting car. This wasn't the intimidating biker she'd met months ago. This was a man who'd found his path to redemption. Over the next few weeks, Julia kept tabs on Jack through the local news and Sarah's updates. His company was thriving, but what caught her attention most were the stories about his charitable work. He'd started a foundation helping at-risk youth, giving them alternatives to gang life. The local paper ran a feature about how he'd transformed an old warehouse into a community center. One morning, Julia was having coffee at her favorite diner when she spotted Jack across the street. He was helping an elderly woman load groceries into her car. It wasn't for show. There were no cameras around, no publicity to be gained. He was simply being kind because that's who he'd become. Sarah's texts kept coming. He's speaking at high schools now, Julia, telling kids about the dangers of gang life. Another day, the foundation just funded 3 new youth programs. And then, he's partnering with local businesses to create job opportunities for former gang members. Julia watched from a distance as Jack's transformation continued. Gone were the suspicious meetings in dark alleys. Instead, she saw him attending Chamber of Commerce meetings, hosting charity events, and working with local law enforcement on community outreach programs. One afternoon, while picking up Ethan from school, Julia saw Jack's company trucks parked outside. He donated new computers to the school's library and funded after-school programs. The principal couldn't stop singing his praises, unaware of Julia's connection to him. "Mom, did you know Mr. Harris built us a new playground?" Ethan asked excitedly. "Tommy says he comes to read to the kindergartners sometimes." Julia smiled, remembering how Jack used to struggle with showing his softer side. Now he was reading to children, and nobody found it strange anymore. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Julia's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her heart skipped when she realized it was from Jack. "Julia, I know you've been watching. I've seen your car sometimes. I understand why you needed distance, and I respect that. But I'd like to show you something, to prove that the changes aren't just surface deep. Would you meet me? Just for coffee? Your choice of place and time." She stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Through the window of her apartment, she could see the community center Jack had built. Children were filing in for after-school programs, their parents looking relieved to have a safe place for their kids. Another text followed. "No pressure. No expectations. I just want you to see who I've become, who I'm still trying to become. Because of you." Julia watched a group of teenagers leave the center, wearing T-shirts with the Foundation's logo. They were laughing, looking like regular kids instead of potential gang members. This was Jack's real legacy now. Not fear or intimidation, but hope and second chances. Her phone buzzed one final time. "The coffee shop on 5th, tomorrow at 2? Only if you want to." The coffee shop on 5th Street buzzed with afternoon activity as Julia pushed open the door. The familiar scent of coffee and freshly baked cookies wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Jack was already there, seated at a quiet corner table by the window. He stood when he saw her, and Julia noticed how his presence had changed, still commanding, but gentler somehow. "Thank you for coming," he said softly, pulling out a chair for her. Julia sat down, smoothing her skirt nervously. "I ordered you a vanilla latte," Jack added. "Still your favorite?" She nodded, surprised he remembered. A comfortable silence settled between them as they waited for their drinks. Julia studied him carefully. The way his shoulders seemed lighter, the peace in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I've been watching everything you've done," Julia finally said. "The foundation, the community center, the school programs." Jack's eyes met hers. "I needed to prove to myself more than anyone that I could be better, that I could give back instead of taking." Their drinks arrived, and Julia wrapped her hand around the warm mug. "Why did you want to meet today, Jack?" He leaned forward slightly, his voice earnest. "Because you were right to walk away when you did. And I needed you to see that I understood why." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "The man you met that day on the sidewalk, he was lost, caught between two worlds, trying to hold on to both. But when I left, it forced me to choose. To really choose, not just talk about it." Jack's fingers traced the rim of his coffee cup. "I realized I couldn't keep one foot in my old life and expect to build something new. Something good." Julia watched as a group of teenagers walked past the window, wearing the Foundation's T-shirts. "Those kids," she said, "you're giving them what you never had, a choice." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Jack replied. "You taught me that, Julia, when you stopped to help a stranger that day, even though every instinct probably told you to keep walking." Julia felt tears prick at her eyes. "I've seen the changes, Jack, but I have Ethan to think about." "I know," he said quickly, "and I would never ask you to rush into anything. He took a deep breath. "I just want a chance to show you who I am now, the man I'm becoming." Julia looked into his eyes, searching for any trace of the old Jack, the dangerous glint, the barely contained anger. Instead, she found sincerity, hope, and something else that made her heart skip. "The Foundation is expanding," he continued. "We're opening centers in other cities. Everything is legitimate, transparent. No more secrets, no more looking over our shoulders." Julia thought about all she'd witnessed over the past months, the positive changes, the lives touched, the community transformed. "You really did it," she said softly. "You really changed everything." "Not everything," Jack replied. My feelings for you never changed. If anything, they've grown stronger. But I understand if you need more time. Julia reached across the table and took his hand. It was warm and steady, like his gaze. I like to try, she said, slowly, one day at a time. Relief and joy spread across Jack's face, softening his features. One day at a time, he agreed. That's all I'm asking for. Julia's hands trembled as she held the brass key to her cafe. The morning sun caught the polished letters on the storefront window, Second Chance's Cafe and Bakery. Jack stood beside her, his solid presence reassuring in the cool morning air. You ready? He asked softly, his voice carrying that gentle tone she'd grown to love. Julia took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp autumn air. I still can't believe this is happening. She looked at the fresh paint, the warm wooden tables visible through the windows, and the cheerful flowers blooming in window boxes. You did this, Jack reminded her, his hand finding the small of her back. Your hard work, your vision. With a little help, she added, glancing up at him with a smile. The past few months have been a whirlwind of planning, renovations, and preparation. Jack had been there every step of the way, offering support, but never taking over. Julia slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door opened with a gentle chime from the bell above. The scent of fresh paint and new beginnings filled her nose as she stepped inside. Everything was ready. The display cases waiting to be filled with pastries, the coffee machines gleaming on the counter, and the cozy seating areas arranged just as she'd imagined. Ethan's going to love helping out on weekends, she said, running her hand along the smooth counter. Her son had already claimed the corner table as his homework spot. Jack moved behind the counter, checking the equipment one last time. The kitchen staff arrives in an hour. The bakers are ready to start their first shift. He paused, watching her take in every detail. You've thought of everything. Almost everything, Julia corrected, pulling out a small frame from her bag. It was a photo of her and Ethan from years ago, when times were harder. She placed it carefully on the wall behind the counter. To remember where we started. Jack came around to stand beside her, looking at the photo. You were so strong, even then. Especially then. I didn't feel strong, Julia admitted, straightening the frame. I felt scared and alone. She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. But not anymore. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting warm patterns across the hardwood floors. Julia walked to the front door, flipping the sign from closed to open. Her heart swelled as she saw the small group of people already waiting outside. Friends, family, and curious neighbors. This place isn't just about coffee and pastries, she said, watching as Jack arranged the morning's fresh flowers in simple vases. It's about giving people a chance just like you gave me. Like we gave each other, Jack corrected gently. He joined her at the door, his presence steady and sure. The man who had once seemed so dangerous now radiated calm strength. Julia reached for his hand, squeezing it tight. Ready to be my business partner? Ready to be whatever you need, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. Together, they opened the doors to welcome their first customers. The morning sun streamed in, warming the wooden floors and making the brass fixtures gleam. The coffee machines hummed to life, and the air filled with the promise of fresh beginnings. Julia looked at Jack, seeing in his eyes the same hope she felt in her heart. They had both come so far from that fateful morning when she'd found him injured on the sidewalk. Now, standing in her cafe, their cafe, she knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.